Hello, I'm Ushcho. Welcome to Let's 8. Scroll down, click on the read more in the blurb and visit some of the links. Become a patron on Patreon for more quality content. Today, we have another episode of Angel Season 5, Hellbound. It's the 4th episode of Season 5, and as I said in the previous episode's review and the episode before that, they wasted a lot of time in the previous episode, Unleashed, that introduced Nina the werewolf. That was not a good episode. This, however, was actually a pretty good episode as long as you don't think about it. If you do think about it, however, it becomes less of a good episode and more of kind of a regrettable episode, but overall, it's a fun one to watch and just turn your mind off a little bit, because the interactions are generally very good. Most of the characters that are involved in the main action are written fairly well, and it's frankly some of the best writing that Fred gets before being written out. You can kind of tell this is one of the episodes where they clearly did not have any idea what they were going to do with the character later on in the season. In fact, they didn't have any idea what they were going to do, period, later in the season. If you look at this episode, it's fairly apparent that they had no real direction for this season. In terms of imagery, this is one of the most evocative and vivid episodes. One of the weakest parts, unfortunately, is Angel himself, but Angel actually doesn't do a very good job in this season of being anywhere near likable as he should do. Not that it was easy to sympathize with him when he went totally, apeshit over having a kid, but it's kind of hard to sympathize with him, especially at first in this season, because the writers didn't really know how to portray him. They kept acting like he was naturally settling into being this CEO sort of fellow. But he's an asshole most of the time, and he doesn't actually need to be. Like, when he's talking with Fred and she sets him straight about doing the right thing, yeah, that's kind of what someone needs to do. Angel letting his own petty annoyances get in the way of someone else potentially doing something very good makes him look very petty, very childish, and wanting to be a special snowflake. At times with Spike in Season 5, especially before he gets recorporealized, Angel seems to be kind of spiteful about the possibility of someone else being around that might be a champion and outdo him. This just makes Angel look bad. And that is unfortunate in terms of writing, because Angel has come from a lot of really bad writing to get to Season 5. It's a shame, but it's not really surprising considering a lot of these are early in the season, and that's before they were really able to hit a stride. To be fair, the better episodes in the first part of the season were more ones that were fun premises that dealt with the characters in an interesting way, rather than ones trying to establish their own ideas for the upcoming season, when in reality it kind of seemed like none of them had actually talked with the others to actually get an idea of what that season was going to be. That's one of the reasons why you can't think too hard about this episode, because there are too many things that kind of occur to you that'll disappoint you about it. For example, doing an episode around Spike as a ghost, and around Fred actually doing something and being sympathetic and having a personality, flies in the face of everything else in this season, unfortunately. She even dresses fairly well for part of this episode. Who knew? This is the only episode, as far as I can tell, of Buffy or Angel to have a content advisory before it was broadcast, which is kind of neat. I was actually going to compare it to an episode of, say, American Horror Story today, although if it had been an episode of American Horror Story, it would have a lot more nudity and a lot more violence. For the time, though, it was probably turning a few heads, although, as it was 2003, I can't imagine it turned too many heads, despite the content advisory. I can't imagine this being too terribly controversial, because most of the stuff that they show, it's gross or off-putting or scary, but it's only there for a short instant of time. Also, even though we do get Spike nudity, and of course it is welcome, you don't really see anything, and it's very brief overall. So it's definitely not American Horror Story in that respect. We don't get a lot of extreme over-the-top violence and extreme nudity, everything short of full frontal. But it was kind of interesting to play with the idea of slightly more mature scares in a slightly more mature show. The content is dealt with in typical Angel fashion. More of the heavy lifting isn't particularly dwelt upon, but we do get some interesting conversations between, say, Angel and Spike, which is good. It also humanizes Angel a bit more and brings him back to the fore and shows him what he needs to have a priority on, instead of just being a petty asshole. the themes are rather heavy, and a lot of it's not dealt with in a particularly profound manner or particularly well, but it's dealt with well enough. Angel and Spike talk about how they're basically resigned to hell, even though there are a lot of different demon dimensions, and there's a lot of complications in this. The cosmology in the Buffy universe is really complicated, and the whole hell thing, well, that's even more complicated. They also seem to have the idea that even though they've done a lot of good things, all the bad stuff far outnumbers it. But isn't it a well-known thing that it just takes a little bit of light to cancel out a lot of darkness? Like, all it takes is one minor happy event to cancel out a whole lot of bad stuff? It's a topic that you could actually debate and discuss quite at length, so perhaps it's for the best that they don't dwell on it too terribly much or too terribly long. Still, it seems a bit irresponsible to bring it up if you're not going to deal with it, but at the very least, it's not bringing up Wolfram and Hart again, and trying to decide whether or not they really like it there. The only time that actually comes up in this episode is when Angel is being bizarrely pally with Eve, and they kind of try to bust Fred's balls over restoring Spike back to physical form. It was a good moment for Fred because she stands up to them, puts them both in their place, lets them know under no uncertain circumstances is she going to sit by and do nothing when she has all these resources here, because that's exactly what they did this to accomplish. They joined on with Wolfram and Hart to make a positive difference with the resources and the abilities that Wolfram and Hart can only provide. It is kind of contrived, though. It's really contrived, to be honest, but the script is overall very solid. And if you don't think about what happens later in the season, it's actually a very good episode. It's very high quality. I would, however, recommend watching it early on in your watch-through of Season 5, which, if you're watching them chronologically, that's probably what you're going to do anyway. Do that. Because if you watch it after watching the rest of it, it'll probably be really disappointing. But uniquely, Fred and Spike have really good moments in it. Wesley is not entirely intolerable. Gunn is actually a lot of fun, even though he doesn't get to do a whole hell of a lot. And while Angel may be kind of an asshole, it at least lets him stretch into not being an asshole all of the time constantly, when he finally does have to admit that, yeah, it is probably better to try and help Spike. Spike also gets to show a lot of his personality in this, not just bluster and bluff, but actual mental power. Just in case we forgot that he is actually intelligent. He's very intelligent. A lot of his Spike persona is just that. There's so much creepy imagery in this, and it's very effective overall. I like the way it was used, and I like the way that a lot of these things were not just what you would call a spring-loaded cat. They weren't cheap scares. They were eerie and weird and creepy and got under your skin. It's easy to imagine that Spike is being driven closer to hell. The effect for Hell's Portal is similarly elegant, understated, and very creepy. For better or for worse, however, Matthias Pavane, who is the antagonist in this, master of the dark arts of sorts that is sacrificing other spirits to hell so he doesn't have to go, he's played by Simon Templeman. And if you know this guy, he is a fantastic voice actor. But if you've seen him in physical work, in non-voice acting, you'll know he's a voice actor because he's got a fantastic voice, but he is a ham and a half in person. I think this is largely because in voice, you have to kind of overdo it. You kind of have to overact a bit to convey emotions well. Of course, when you're acting in person, you can't do that, or else you're just going to look like a huge great ham, which is kind of what he looks like. If you've seen him in Charmed, in which he plays the Angel of Death, you will know exactly what I'm talking about, because he plays it so broadly that it sometimes seems like he's going for comedy. There are, however, some kind of weird and kind of interesting moments, like when they come back from an advert break, and the dude is practically mounting naked Spike and saying a bunch of really suggestive things. Suggestive things that could be troubling too, especially considering the situation. So that was rather effective. It was unsettling and weird, and perhaps uncomfortably erotic? I don't know. Okay, now a list of weird stuff I noticed in this episode. First, it's not surprising to me that they would have a large shower in a science lab, because they are typically equipped with those, especially if you're working with dangerous chemicals, which, since this is a TV science lab where science happens, and that means mixing a bunch of stuff in flasks, yeah, okay, I'll give you that. It not only says, though, that it's being watched by closed-circuit cameras right outside of the shower, but the showers have huge great windows, and there are lots of them. There's not just like one or two of them. And generally, science showers are not hot. They are just water. lots and lots of water to flush out chemicals and flush them off your skin, out of your eyes, etc. I have no fucking clue why they would have a shower with huge giant windows that you can see right in, watch everybody shower, except to further the plot, which they could have easily done with something else. It was so stupid. Looking at it, it's just like, why would they even have that? Because you think about, you think, oh, well, a laboratory shower. Wait, no, that's not how those go, is it? No, it's not. It's not at all. Why would you have that? It was so gratuitous. Also, on the science note, Fred should be enough of a genius, because they just got done saying she was a genius, to be able to pronounce nuclear correctly. Another question I had is, if Pavane is a spirit himself, and they constantly are running these sweeps with their psychics and whatnot, why can't they actually detect him? It makes no sense that they wouldn't be able to detect him. It makes sense that they wouldn't be able to detect the spirits that he uses, or at least the images of the spirits he uses, because they're not actually there, as it's said later. However, why wouldn't they be able to detect him? That didn't make a lot of sense to me. Another note, about 3 minutes in, on the back of the amulet that Fred holds up, there are googly eyes on it. You will notice when you watch the episode, around minute 3, just keep watching the amulet. There are some other grievances, like, why bring in the psychic, who was a fantastic character and so much fun, if you weren't actually going to make her a character that recurred? Why even waste a character like that on something so stupid? It was a scene that didn't matter at all, and ultimately it didn't help the plot. All it was wasting time with a character that would have been better recurring later in the season, coming back and becoming a regular character, because that kind of character is one that they need to have around. It's a lot more fun than most of the characters that they had around. And last of all, do we really have to have this whole, oh, it's our only chance, we'll never get the chance again, one or the other choice? It's silly. It's silly and it's kind of stupid. Also, there's no reason why Spike couldn't have just tackled him into the thing and both of them get recorporealized. Also, vampire speed. That's kind of a thing. He could have easily recorporealized himself and taken care of business. Because Pavane, for all of his skill at the dark arts, would probably not be worth too much when suddenly confronted with a flesh and blood vampire when he's flesh and blood himself. It just struck me as weird that Pavane is suddenly able to threaten real living people, and maybe that's what they felt they needed with the scene with the psychic, but it's just stupid to throw a character under a bus, especially a fun, interesting character that's well acted, that's better acted than some of the regular characters, just saying, when you could have just established the questionable threat anyway by having him threaten Fred. Did we really need it to be the only chance they're gonna get? Well, the answer obviously is no, because if you watch later in the season, Fred becomes Illyria, and Spike gets recorporealized in less than 10 seconds of the beginning of an episode, by a deus ex machina, and we get the wind-up of a story that never actually gets a decent resolution. Yay! So that's why I say you can't really think about the later episodes and appreciate this episode quite so much, but if you don't think about it too hard, it's actually a pretty well done episode. If you think about it imagining that they had no idea where they were going with the season, which it's obvious at this point they didn't, then it's more than a serviceable episode. In fact, it's one of the better and more evocative ones. It has an uncommonly mature attitude towards the thought of eternal torment, even if it doesn't quite live up to expectations in dealing with the potential reality for that, at least in this universe. Overall, though, it's definitely a watchable episode, and despite the arguable nature of whether or not it's still good if you watch the later episodes, it's fun for a watch, so include it in your watch-through of Season 5. And that's been another episode of Angel. I'll be back next time with another one. You're welcome. Bye.